Now, a lot of people often ask me about the process of writing, what it's like to be a crime writer, where ideas come from, what I think of the industry and crime writing in general. And for me, I always think those things are quite subjective. It's your personal opinions, your personal ways of working are quite different to other writers. As writers, and as crime writers in particular, there's a lot that unites us and a lot that divides us. So I'm always talking to other crime writers and getting their views on things and their perspectives. And today I thought I would do so on video. So I'm talking to Robert Daws, who not only is a well-known TV and theatre actor, is also a fantastic crime writer with the Rock series set in Gibraltar. So a very different setting from my books, but also quite similar in a lot of ways. I mean, perhaps if you tell the viewers a little bit about your books first of all.
Yeah, absolutely. The first book is a novella called The Rock, which introduced the characters of Detective Sergeant Tamara Sullivan and Chief Inspector Gus Broderick. And Tamara Sullivan has sort of disgraced herself. Not really, but she's taken the blame for an incident during her time with the London Met. And as a result of that, to try and put it under the carpet, they've sent her away for a 3-month secondment period to the Royal Gibraltar Police Force. Interestingly enough, one of the things that drew me to Gibraltar was, of course, the police force in Gibraltar is absolutely modelled on the British police force in going back to the Victorian times, when it was before then, actually, 1827 I think it was. They're the second oldest police force in the world after the London Met. So there we are. So she comes to Gibraltar, not looking forward to it at all, not a great lover of the sunshine, feeling that her career as a high-flying police officer is over. And within a very short period of time, she finds herself caught up in an investigation and doing what she does best, which is solving murders.
Excellent. I mean, you started as a TV actor, a stage actor,
Yeah.
and come into writing from there. Do you think that helped, having that background in knowing story?
Yeah, I guess so. You certainly know character from an acting point of view, and you certainly appreciate story from plays and scripts that I've been obviously doing it for decades now. So yes, and I've always written. I've written plays and I've written short stories, and I co-created a detective drama for Radio 4 called Truman and Riley, which ran for several years, which was great. So I've always dabbled and I've always been fascinated. Many of my best friends are writers, albeit they've been television or theatre writers. So the progression into writing crime fiction sort of came out of the fact that I was working on the radio, I was developing certain ideas for television, and looking at them in sort of script form, I went, wait a minute, it'd be great if, I sort of maybe I could transpose this into a book. Met you, who sort of said, well, I think that's a very good idea, and this is what I've done, blah, 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 blah. And that was 4 years ago, and it's been terrific. From that, I've enjoyed it immensely. It means I don't have to travel around the country. There's certain jobs I just don't want to do as an actor. I can just put up the I'm writing flag and stay at home and cook the tea. And think very hard, which is basically what writers do.
Yeah, I mean, one of the first things we did together, you were saying about 4 years ago, we worked on the audio dramatisation of Exit Stage Left,
Yes.
which Keith Atack produced. I mean, again, that's a totally different medium to work in, and in terms of, it's all story though, isn't it? Audio dramatisation, you're looking at audio books, you're looking at books, films, stage, TV.
Well, all different mediums, but they all are telling stories. I mean, when we worked on the excellent Exit Stage Left, which is the first of your Kempston Hardwick Golden Age murder mystery novels, albeit it's set in contemporary times. I mean, that was great because, you adapted it. It was the book, and we said, look, this is absolutely great. Can you adapt it? And as usual, you said, absolutely, I'm on the case. You delivered a terrific script, and then we cast it, and we went into studio, and it all fell into place. The same story, but essentially quite different. As you used to say, you used to turn up and say, gosh, I never heard I never thought that was going to sound like that, or I never thought that was going to do like that. And of course, adapting it to radio, you had to take certain different routes through the work, which came to the same conclusions, obviously. But a fascinating way of sort of taking your book to performance, as opposed to my route was from performance to book. So we've both been coming from very different angles.
Yeah, it's really interesting for me working on that, because I think, if I remember rightly, we did the dramatisation between the first and the second books. I think there was only one out at that point, if I remember rightly. And since then, the characters of Kempston and Ellis, when I hear them and I see them when I'm writing the books, it's very much the characters that you and Stephen Polframan created. So it's quite strange as well seeing that feedback in. I kind of wonder how many people have had their work adapted for TV. For example, the Rebus books come to mind. How much of that will feed back into their writing again? Because it has for me quite a lot.
Well, yes, I guess. I mean, the traditional response to that has always been the stories you've heard about Morse and Frost, and the writers going, "Oh, I never saw that actor playing the part." Although, you know, subsequently they learned to love the work of John Thor and what have you. But yes, I there must be feedback, you know, because...
And it's very similar actually to the Kempston Hardwick books. In my eyes, even though it's never really said, Kempston Hardwick was younger and Ellis Flint was older.
Yes.
And when we did the adaptation, I'm sure you don't mind me saying, Stephen Polframan is younger than you.
He said, well, and remains so to this day.
Yes. Yeah. And again, in my head, since then, I've always seen it now the other way around. Yeah. And it's strange the way you write these things, and they seem perfectly natural to you, but then you see them through somebody else's eyes, and you think, actually, yeah, I like it better that way. And it's weird how writing is such a personal thing and such an intimate thing, yet can become really collaborative in the long term. Just from something
well, that's
simple
interesting, because you're concentrating on how an adaptation might enrich your future books and how you see the characters, which is absolutely terrific. Very often with television dramas, of course, you may actually have a couple of actors play. Adam Dalgleish, for instance, has been played both by Roy Marsden and by Martin Shaw.
Back to Rebus again, same thing.
Back to Rebus, Ken Starr. Was it Hannah? Jonah Hannah did it as well. And so completely different interpretations of the part, absolutely valid, but they're taking the material and making it their own. So I think I'd be fascinated if I ever saw my characters, for instance, brought to life by an actor. I'm sure I'd be overjoyed. I'm sure I would be overjoyed, and I wouldn't hesitate to use whatever, if I was allowed to, and by copyright and whatever, to use any ideas that come up that you know, keep it fresh and nuances and ideas that they may bring to the table. It's quite.
Do you think that's something on the cards for you then, the TV and film?
Well, the Rock's been optioned for television, so that's been in development. That's at script stage. So that's been fascinating, because that's another area. Very often the writers of the books do not adapt their work for television. It's not always the case, but has more often than not been the case, that as a writer your books get optioned and the company or the broadcaster say, well, you know, we'll want this writer to come on and adapt the books. So there's another layer, I think, for the author to go through.
This is all things I'm thinking about at the moment, because you know, speaking to people about adapting my work for film and TV and what have you. So it's all stuff that's very fresh in my mind. That's very new to me, and that's one of the things that excites me about being a writer, is that it's not just sitting in a room typing all day. It's all the other stuff that goes with it. For example, you know, coming out and doing something like this, doing a video interview, or doing radio things. You're looking at TV and film adaptations.
Is that your agent or mine? I
don't know. I think
it'll turn off in a minute. I'm sure it's absolutely desperately urgent, but they'll have to wait.
I was going to say, it's one of the things that excites me about the job, is that it is actually quite varied. Yes. And recently I've been going out to recording studios and doing the audio books, speaking to people about film and TV things. And the day in the life of a writer is probably quite a bit different to what a lot of people think.
Well, certainly in your hands and your experience, I mean, one of the things that, when we became friends was that you were an independent writer. I mean, things have stayed the same for you in that respect, although you have a publisher now. I mean, you were building a new model with many other people, but you were building a new model of how to write books and publish them, and to a degree have more control over your work. And I found that fascinating when we first met. And so your day is, like any other writers, I suppose, sitting down, punching away at the QWERTY, thinking, falling asleep, waking up, brilliant idea, getting on with it. But the other side, of course, is running the business, which is something that you do very well, extremely well. You have, coming from an area of marketing and running businesses and various other things, you manage to merge both areas of creativity in those jobs to actually, build, write your books and become a hugely successful best-selling author, which is fantastic. Not only that, it's what's that thing that Kevin Spacey once said about teaching? He said, when you've reached the top, always send the elevator down. To give other people,
Yeah.
And you're very good. You share your ideas, you share your thoughts. You've been given me many pieces of excellent.
I think it's when I started 6 years ago, self-publishing and independent publishing was very much in the early stages.
Yes.
And it was kind of a case of people saw it as the same thing as vanity publishing,
Yes.
that it's a route that people went down because they couldn't get their books published anywhere else.
Yes.
And I think I was perhaps one of the first people to really have a proper go at saying, actually, this is what I'm going to do, but not for those reasons. I mean, I've still never sent a manuscript into a publisher, and I don't think I ever will. And the reason I was doing it is, as you say, in terms of getting that control and just doing things your own way. And I think, I think that's just a model that suits me better, really.
Well, it's a model that I'm happy to say, and thank you, it suits me. I mean, I'm in the stage now where I have a print publisher, but I look after all my ebooks. So as regards to getting in books into shops and various other things, I know nothing about that. So I bow to the expertise of a publisher, traditional publisher. But as regards books sold online and ebooks or whatever, I find that very exciting, and sort of a sense of marketing and various other things that you do for that. So that takes up, if I was having to do the lot, it would be a nightmare. But I can actually just say, right, I can write, and I can actually spend part of the day working with a marketing person to actually promote the books online. Now, I would never have thought to do that, and so you do feel a little bit more control. It does take a lot of work. You get out of it what you put in, and you have to put the hours in to some degree. But you also have that wonderful thing where you feel very close to your readers.
Yeah.
I'm sure you do too. You've got a relationship with lots of them. They're not just distant people walking into a.
It cuts out the middleman. It gives you, as you say, a very direct relationship. Isn't it?
I mean, that's exciting. So what's emerged for you to some degree, and because you're a much bigger possession than I am. I'm a new boy on the block, but I love the balance that creates in my working life. And if you hadn't suggested it to begin with, I wouldn't have actually gone down that particular path. So what I'm trying to say is I'm very grateful for that. But I think an awful lot of new writers look to do that. Friends of mine who've come along, they say, right, well, I'm going to take care of the ebooks, and if I can find a publisher who's willing to just deal with the print and all the rest of it, absolutely great. I also have an agent, which is very helpful, certainly when you're looking at TV and various other things, which I know you're all over as well.
Getting there slowly.
One thing with Adam that you have to realise is he's always 3 steps ahead of me on virtually everything, and quite rightly, So, but
in terms of your sort of writing itself, for me, it was just it was natural that I would, again, natural that I would publish myself, but natural that I would turn to crime fiction because it's what I enjoy what I enjoy reading. I enjoy reading thrillers. So, on deciding to write a book, that was just sort of quite natural for me. Was it a similar thing for you, I suppose, or?
I guess it came out of the simple fact that when I was working on the television and radio pieces, before I started on them, someone had said, "Look, there's a market for this genre in those mediums, and we know the BBC are looking for this, and we know so and so is looking for that. Have you got any ideas?" So that came out of hearing about that from conversation, producers, friends of mine, and whatever. So I went, "Oh, fine. Well, I did read and I loved the genre, but I wouldn't have necessarily have thought to have sat down and write a murder mystery or a police investigation series from that." So
that's quite fascinating for me. That kind of thinking there's a market out there for this. Yeah. Therefore, I'll write to that market. That's something that interests me quite a lot, and a lot of people have said to me recently, particularly after Her Last Tomorrow and the hook that had. And I then started looking for future books in terms of thinking, okay, the success of that book was probably largely down to that hook. Could you murder your wife to save your daughter? So that then got me thinking about other hooks and what gets people hooked on a book, what makes people think, yes, I absolutely must read that. And I suppose that's when that marketing side of the brain then feeds back into the writing side of the brain. So I've been thinking ever since about coming up with other hooks and ways of thinking, actually, what makes people think I must read that book? Because if that kind of success can be replicated again, then that'd be marvellous. You've obviously got that same kind of mindset in terms of thinking what the readers want.
Well, it was not something that I set out to think. It was something that I was presented with, and they said, "So you're right." But people write different books for so many different reasons, and of course, many people write books because they've got that book in them and they've been passionate to get it out, and they write it and the rest of it. And there are many thousands of professional writers who write. It's their living. That's how they hopefully earn their money, and therefore they have to keep on top of that to some degree. They, even the big brands, writers, friends of mine who are, top international best-selling authors. It's a very serious business about what's the next book going to be? What's the public mood? What are people interested in at the moment? They have to keep on top of all of that, and I know you do exactly the same. So there we are. You talk about a hook people into a particular story. You might not have written that story, but you came across a great hook and thought, great, that's the sort of book that I would like to read, so I'm going to write that book in the hope that many thousands of people will actually think like me.
I suppose all books start from that nugget, whether that nugget is the hook or whether it's a particular character that comes into your head or whether it's a particular setting. No book arrives fully formed. It always starts as, for you, for example, you wanted to have something set in Gibraltar, maybe,
yes.
Maybe that was your starting point or what have you. So I think, I don't think it's a massive change to the way a lot of people write anyway. It's just a kind of a small twist on that.
Yeah.
One thing you touched on there in terms of different styles of books and knowing what to write, it always quite interests me how reading habits change quite a lot. I've noticed a trend towards people, which helps me, people liking slightly shorter works, because mine tend to be shorter anyway. They tend to be a bit more kind of action-packed. I leave out all the fluff. I don't bother, with what so-and-so's had for breakfast in between the scenes. You go from one scene to the next and try and keep the pace up. And I think reading habits are moving towards that quite a lot, with people now using e-readers, getting through books a hell of a lot quicker. It used to be a case that people would buy a book every now and again, and it'd be a big old, thick hardback book, and you'd sit there for a long time enjoying it. And I think now the culture perhaps is, as it is with most things, with TV and with music in general, people are consuming. Readers now can find the books that they've always wanted to read, and they can read what they want, wherever they want, in any way they want. And I think it's just liberated the whole market, really, in terms of e-readers. I'm not obviously I love e-readers and I love e-books because it's 70-80% of my income, but I think it's also great in terms of the way it's liberated things. I don't think it will replace paper books.
Well, no.
I don't think it will. I personally prefer a paper book.
And it's a very exciting time to be a writer because, there are one thing I have realised is there's so much interest in literature. I mean, the country has got literary festivals everywhere now, and they're on the whole hugely well attended. There's a great interest in it. There are wonderful reading groups, people blogging, people reviewing on, online and various other things, and there's a huge wave of interest in literature. Certainly in the crime, thrillers are absolutely huge. But you do a police procedural, contemporary. Night Culver House, you do your Kempston Hardwick, and now you've moved into psychological thrillers. Now that is different genres, different forms of storytelling under the umbrella of murder, mystery, thriller, investigation, and all that sort of thing. How do you find you approach the different genres within the overall genre?
Well, for me, the biggest difference, really, even though they might look to be more similar, is between the Night and Culver House and the Kempston Hardwick books. Yeah. They are very different. I mean, Kempston Hardwick, for example, the first issue I always have to get around is why aren't the police involved? And if they are, to what level? Because at the end of the day, Kempston Hardwick and Ellis Flint need to be the ones who are investigating and who crack the case. So sometimes the police are involved, sometimes for whatever reason they have to not be. For example, in the 13th Room, they don't believe there's been a crime, they believe it's suicide. In the first book, the police are investigating and Kempston Hardwick sticks his oar in because he thinks something isn't quite right. But for me, a lot of people, when I wrote Her Last Tomorrow, which is my first psychological thriller, were saying to me about how it's a different genre and it's a psychological thriller rather than a crime thriller or a police procedural. I mean, obviously it's not a police procedural, but for me, it wasn't a case of thinking, oh, psychological thrillers are big, I'll write one of those. I didn't know that at the time, otherwise I would have written it a lot sooner. I wouldn't have had it sitting in the drawer for 6 months before I put it out. But for me, it was a case of thinking, rather than writing it from the detective's point of view, writing it from the point of view of the people who are involved in the situation and involved where the crime is happening to them, because that always fascinates me. And in a few of the later Night and Culver House books, I'd started to do that from sort of Jack Bean Imble onwards. I'd had some point of view scenes from the character's point of view, or from the killer's point of view, and that always interests me, seeing it not just from the investigation side of things, but being right there in the room, seeing it happening. So for me, Her Last Tomorrow wasn't massively different from, for example, the Night and Culver House books. It was just a case of seeing it through another person's eyes. It's a case in much the same way, but just...
Well, the police play far less a role in that book than obviously your other books. They are more police procedural and what have you, and that's fascinating. But I mean, you say that, but it does seem like a very different shift and a different way of approaching the story. Did you find it very freeing? Did you find it very...
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, for me, the Night and Culver House books do require quite a bit of research, quite a bit of talking to police officers, and I do have to play fast and loose with the procedure side of things. I try and keep it as realistic as I can.
Yes.
A lot of times I get emails from people saying, oh, that wouldn't have happened because of this, and I have to try and say, well, I know, but I have to, because otherwise the story wouldn't work. So you kind of got to play within the confines of reality, but at the same time being able to
well, you're still you're always above all else a storyteller. Yeah. So what was a famous phrase I forget who said? Don't let a detail get in the way of a good story.
Absolutely.
Or what have you.
But the story has to win out, I think.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. But also the amount of research you do. How do you find that? Because with the Night at Culver House, for instance, I do quite a lot of research for these books as well. You learn so much, and there comes a point where sometimes I've caught myself saying, well, you're just putting that down there because you know it. Yes. Is that absolutely essential? Yeah. So you have to get a real balance between making it absolutely authentic and not, boring your audience with procedure.
I think that's why the psychological thrillers have been quite liberating, because, and again, the Kempston Hardwick ones are similar, because I try and keep the police in the background if I can. they're fun to write and more liberating to write because you're not kind of stopping every 5-10 minutes to go, oh, I've got to go and check this fact or check that detail. You're essentially writing about the lives of the people there, and they're talking to each other, investigating this, that and the other, or going through these different processes, but none of it is kind of constrained by the workings of the police environment. And in fact, real policing is quite boring, really. There's a lot of paperwork, a lot of sort of going over things again and again and again, and there are massive teams working on things as well. You wouldn't have a case where the same detective would be out to see you numerous times. There'd be a different officer would get very few details about a case and have to go out and get some more information, and it's very much a team effort.
Well, you have to condense time, really, compress time, don't you? Yeah. Really, because as you say, many certainly murder investigations can last for years, and whatever. Within a book, you really do have to keep a narrative drive going to keep people wanting more, and therefore I find that constantly. You say, well, that would take months to do, or you'd have to wait many more days to get that back from forensics, or bum bum bum, or what have you. And so I suppose so long as you're not actually doing overdoing the coincidence card, which is always a danger. Where I watch things occasionally and I go, oh, that's just one thing too many.
There would have been a better way of doing it.
Would have been a better way to do it. So that's another challenge of the crime writer, to actually keep it as a story which you just can't put down, page turning or whatever, but also make it all authentic. And you can't necessarily have it both ways, can you?
No, but it's nice when you strike the balance.
Yes.
And I quite often get emails from readers who are police officers, or who work in police stations, or are civilian workers in the police, who say the realism is what attracts me to it. And I always think, obviously, A, thank you very much, and B, I'm quite surprised, because I play fast and loose with the procedure and with the facts quite a bit, because for me the story has to come first. So it's always quite nice when you do seem to strike that balance, and it's always for me, I find it's nice when obviously you're creating a completely fictional world and a complete story world, but for it to be realistic, I think adds another dimension, and perhaps makes the books even more scary and addictive for a lot of people, maybe. Well,
yes, I'd agree. So what would you say to a new writer who's sort of maybe listening to you chat and saying, actually, I've had this story, I've got this great story, and I've never quite got round to doing it. It seems to me, I get asked that question very often, how do you do it? And I say, the bottom line is you do it. You sit down and you just have to complete it.
I always give people 6 words: bum on seat, fingers on keyboard. And there is no other way. You got to, and people go, well, how do you do it? How do you structure a book? How do you go about writing it? Do you just start? Do you plan? I said, well, this is what I personally do. I personally sit down and plan and have a skeleton and then put the flesh on the bones. But a lot of people I know, and I'm immensely jealous of them, just go chapter 1 and begin there. So I'd say try each method, try different ways. As long as you get a book down and written, it really doesn't matter. I think for a lot of new people, perhaps planning might work better, but it's a very subjective thing. We all have different ways of writing and different ways of doing things, and there aren't really hard and fast rules, are there? That's what I love about it.
There are people who say that there are certain rules which you can adapt, I guess. But
in my case, make it your mission to break them.
Yes, well, yes, exactly. I mean, I've been watching the Great British Landscape competition on Sky Arts, for instance, and you have 8 professional painters and 50 other painters, and they've all got pretty much the same view. And the quality of the work that comes out, they're all completely different, but they're the same view. So it comes down to your taste and what you particularly like, and that's exactly the same with readers. There are some readers who will absolutely adore an Adam Croft. There are other readers who will just say, "Oh, I love an Adam Croft," but a Joe Nesbo, Peter James is whatever, or they love lots of different writers. But it does come down to one's own particular taste in a writer, what world one wants to go into. and the characters, certainly returning series characters like you tend to write, people actually just go, I like being in the company of these people. I feel I want to be with Kempson, I want to be with Knight Culverhouse, I want to be with these people and take me on another journey. There's a comfort in that. Do you get that feedback from your readers that they...
Yeah. And people, the longer a series goes on, the more they get attached to the characters and the more they find out about them. And I'm finding, particularly with the Kempson Hardwick books, people who have gone through and have read the 4 books that there are so far have started to become more attached. I mean, Kempson Hardwick, in the first couple of books, you think he's this kind of aloof person. You're not quite sure what to make of him. He's a little bit odd. He's not your typical protagonist.
He's on the spectrum somewhere, isn't he?
Yes, yeah. But I think people are starting to work out what he's about and starting to see different sides to him. And that's a series that I've got a long arc planned for. Now, I know what he's all about. I know where he's come from, why he does these things, and I know where it ends as well. I've got the last book in my head.
You see, this is news to me. We're in the studio in a couple of weeks' time doing the audiobooks for them, so I'm glad I'm getting this information.
Well, yeah, it's so
I don't want to know.
No.
It's quite interesting, doing the reading. I'm looking forward to doing the progression.
Discovering him at the same time.
So, yes, discovering him at exactly the same time.
Yeah, so it's quite interesting seeing people start to see these different dimensions to him and to discover him, and I think that's something you perhaps don't get with the other series. That's why they're quite different, and they do have 2 quite distinct fan bases. There's not many people who like both. They tend to either be one or the other. So yeah, it's quite.
How do you find that versatility? Because not every writer, by any means, has the versatility to be able to flip from one set of characters and one style of writing to another set of characters and another style of writing.
For me, it keeps things fresh.
Yeah.
I don't just flip between those two either. I also go into psychological thrillers. I also write plays.
Yes, you do.
We're looking at writing the TV adaptations and things like that, and various other different sort of theatre projects and things we've been talking about. So for me, it just keeps things fresh. It's not a case of having to keep going back over the same ground. Every day is different, and that's what I love.
Well, one thing I observe with you, absolutely, apart from your passion for writing, and your passion not only for the books and the writing of the books, but your passion for the industry in general and its possibilities, which is very exciting. The thing that I also observe is that you work very, very hard. You've got an iron discipline, and you'll say, "Oh, I haven't," but you have. You've got an iron discipline. I'll phone up occasionally, and you'll phone me, and you'll say, "Oh yeah, I'll have a cup of coffee, or a pint, but I've got to get my word count done." So I just think you're playing hard to get. But you say, "I've got to get to my 3,000 words this afternoon," and and I attempt to do the same in a busy household. Lovely household and what have you, but you really get down, put your sleeve, and you do it. And when you say, "I'm going to write that and I'm going to finish it," 9 times out of 10 you'll do that. So that's a part of the process as well, isn't it?
Yeah, it's just for me, it's a fascinating time to be a writer. It's a very liberating time. It's a very fun time. We must do this again sometime. We must have another in-depth chat.
Absolutely. Cup of coffee?
Absolutely.